I'm Jenny Cunningham, a play therapist at With Kids. Today I would like to talk about the concept of containment. Containment is something I write about a lot in my play therapy reports. It's an essential part of play therapy, but it's also very important outside of the therapy room. So first we're going to look at what we mean by containment. If we look it up in the dictionary, we find the following definition. The containment of something dangerous or unpleasant is the act or process of keeping it under control within a particular area or place. In wider use, this would refer to physical containment, perhaps of an oil spill or an infectious disease. When we speak about containment in relation to therapeutic work, the thing that is being contained is emotion. Children who are referred for play therapy are almost always struggling with emotional issues. For them, these emotions can feel dangerous and unpleasant. When they come to play therapy, they can use the therapy room and their relationship with their therapist as a container for these difficult emotions. I'll give some examples of containment from play therapy sessions a little later. First, we'll have a look at where this concept comes from and why some children need more support with it than others. One of the easiest ways to understand what is meant by this emotional containment is to think of the relationship between young infants and their primary caregivers. Babies rely wholly on their caregivers. They're born helpless with limited means of communication and can easily become overwhelmed by their senses. A baby doesn't know if it's hungry, tired, scared, or ill. It only knows it doesn't feel good, so it communicates this in the only way it can, by crying. The job of the caregiver is to recognise and accept this emotional communication, think about it for the baby, then return it in a more bearable, processed form. For example, recognising that baby is not happy, realising that baby is due a feed, so providing that feed. In this very simple example, the caregiver is showing the baby that they are willing and able to cope with these strong emotions and can respond to them in a way that quickly helps baby to calm down and feel safe and settled once more. These simple everyday occurrences in early life are the building blocks for our ability to be able to understand and hold on to our emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Of course, we're only human, so no matter how responsive and in tune with our needs our caregivers were during our early childhood, or no matter how much we understand our own emotions and behaviour, we're all susceptible to becoming overwhelmed by our emotions every now and then. Our ability to contain our own emotions is also affected by a wide range of external factors. For example, if we're feeling unwell or stressed out due to a house move, for instance, our capacity to deal with any additional difficult events, for example, a disagreement with a partner or a child who refuses to listen, is much diminished, which may lead to the unprocessed emotion of a situation leaking out of us in the form of an angry outburst or maybe even floods of tears. As with many things in life, containing emotion is much more difficult for children than for adults. They have had much less practice and therefore require more help with their emotional awareness and regulation. Each time an understanding adult recognises an emotion that is becoming overwhelming to a child and helps them to manage this, they become better equipped to manage this emotion in the future. As with adults, the capacity that children have to contain or deal with their emotions can be greatly reduced by what is going on in their lives. The children I work with in play therapy are typically dealing with a great deal of stress, whether stemming from difficulties at home, dramatic life events, or coping with illness, to name but a few generalised examples. It naturally follows that these children are prone to emotional outbursts, which often seem disproportionate to the triggering event. If we think back to the image of an internal container for emotions within ourselves, then imagine a child who is already less able to understand and regulate their emotions, a child who is carrying a heavy load of stress and trying desperately to stay in control, as nobody likes to feel out of control. So they try to stay in control by attempting to push more of these unprocessed, confusing emotions into their already overflowing internal containing box. It's hopefully easy to imagine how this can easily lead to an explosion of raw, unprocessed emotion, often manifesting as difficult to manage behaviour. These children just don't have the internal capacity to contain or manage all of their difficult feelings and experiences. But thankfully, this is something that play therapy can help to provide. Much of the work we do as child centred play therapists is based on the work of Virginia Axline, one of the most important pioneers of play therapy as we know and practice it today. Axline defined 8 basic principles of play therapy, which, when followed, allow children to use the therapy room and the therapist as a containing space for their difficult emotions and experiences. It is very important, especially when therapy takes place within school, that the child is aware that the rules are different within the playroom. Often children and adults think of strong feelings such as anger or impulses such as aggression as being bad and worry that expressing them will get them into trouble or make people believe they're a bad person. Having these feelings or impulses recognised and reflected back to them in the same manner as feelings such as happy or excited are recognised and reflected on lets the child know that all feelings are okay and allows them to fully share or express the many confusing feelings they may have been working hard to keep inside. Alongside this feeling of permissiveness, it is also very important that consistent limits and boundaries exist within the playroom. As play therapists, we often introduce a child to the process of therapy by telling them that they can do almost anything they like within the playroom and that we will let them know if there's something that they do that's not allowed. Children will often spend a lot of time during early sessions testing these boundaries, working out how far they can go, and testing their therapist to see if he or she is consistent and therefore trustworthy. Children need to know that their therapist is strong or robust enough to cope with the plethora of difficult emotions and experiences they hold within. Often, children will be scared to release their anger, for example, as they believe it is so dangerous and unpleasant that it's sure to destroy whatever or whoever gets in its way. Consistent boundaries help children feel safe enough to express these emotions and share their experiences. They trust that the therapist and the play therapy room is a safe place to release, process, and possibly leave behind these difficult feelings and experiences. Children use their therapy as a container in many different ways. Some children like to make a lot of mess, pretty much literally using the play therapy room as a dumping ground for their difficult thoughts and feelings. It's very helpful to them that they can leave this mess behind them at the end of their session. They don't have to tidy it up and can leave it for their therapist to deal with. Other children express their emotions through artwork, creating paintings with many layers, each of which holds or represents some aspect of what is currently going on for that child. The sandbox is incredibly important for releasing, processing, and containing emotion. Whole worlds can be created, destroyed, buried, and rebuilt as a child moves through the process of their therapy. Whenever I think about containment within play therapy, my mind is always drawn back to a girl I worked with as a trainee therapist. She was well into her therapy when the scenario I'm going to describe happened. She'd spent a lot of time testing the boundaries of therapy and testing me. She also did a lot of very messy layered painting and made a lot of mess within the playroom. By this stage in her therapy, she was a lot more self contained and not needing to make so much mess anymore. In this scenario, I felt she was joyfully sharing what the most important aspect of therapy had been for her, and this was containment. I've tried to recreate the scene with figures in a doll's house, which was fun. The figure in the corner represents the child, the figure in the chair represents me. On this occasion, midway through a session, she stood in the corner of the room and let out the hugest, loudest pretend sneeze. Ah, choo! This felt so cathartic and joyful. And when I reflected on what a big sneeze it had been, she replied, "Yes, and now there's snot all over the room." She then continued to pretend sneeze in the same manner, talking about how the snot was now covering the room, covering me, dripping from the ceiling, how it was everywhere in the room apart from the corner that she was standing in. I believe that the imaginary snot represented all of the difficult feelings, issues, and experiences she had worked through during her therapy. She was showing how free of them she now felt, and probably unconsciously showing her understanding and appreciation of the containment therapy had provided. This session took place over 15 years ago, but still often pops into my head when I think about the emotional containment offered by play therapy. So, if you have ever lent a listening ear to a friend in distress, or supported a child in a state of emotional meltdown, you will know how draining and exhausting an experience acting as a container for the emotions of another can be. To illustrate this, we can again think of the all encompassing task of providing care for newborn babies. If the primary caregiver has no support, it's very easy for them to become overwhelmed by the emotional needs of their baby. The containing space within them fills up, making it much harder for them to recognise and respond to the needs of their child. However, if the primary caregiver has a supportive partner, parent, or friend who can lend a listening ear and hopefully offer some practical support as well, that helps them to feel less overwhelmed. They're sharing the emotional burden and therefore have the space they need within to attend to the needs of their baby. As play therapists, we come into contact with children who have had incredibly tough experiences and need to work through very difficult emotions. To ensure that we don't become overwhelmed by this, we're required to have regular clinical supervision, during which we talk about our work and share our experience of the emotional content of our sessions. In supervision, we can share the emotional burden of our work, which allows us to think more clearly about the needs of the children we work with and feel ready to continue to support them in the best way we can. Teaching is an incredibly demanding job. In any given class, there will be children dealing with a huge variety of issues and difficulties, many of these children requiring a great deal more support than it is possible for their teacher to give. I strongly feel that teachers should have access to support similar to the clinical supervision that therapists are required to receive. But as this is not the case, it is important that teachers are aware of times when they are becoming overwhelmed by the demands placed on them by the children they work with and have ways of dealing with the stress that this brings. Sharing the burden with a trusted colleague or a member of senior management will hopefully be an option, but it's also really important to think about self care, which I'll touch upon soon. Another incredibly demanding job is parenting. It often feels like children save their worst behaviour and biggest feelings for when they're with their parents. And while this might make parents feel not good enough or under attack, it's actually a sign of a strong child parent relationship. The child trusts that the parent is strong enough to cope with their big emotions and feel secure enough to know that their parent will still love them no matter how badly they behave. Offering emotional containment to our children is a huge part of parenting, and it's again very easy for parents to become overwhelmed by the demand this places on them. As an earlier example with the baby, a supportive partner, parent, or friend can help the parent to feel less overwhelmed, acting as a container for them so they are better able to help their children deal with their emotions and experiences. So, now I'm going to talk briefly about some different activities that may help you as a parent or teacher to help a child in need of emotional containment. Children and adults are better able to cope with their emotions when they feel safe. Clear and consistent boundaries with predictable routines help children to feel secure and better able to cope with whatever life throws at them. Physical activity is great for emotional release, as are expressive arts. Running, jumping, shouting, hitting a drum. Quieter and calmer activities can also be therapeutic and offer containment. Things like colouring in, or having something small to squeeze and fidget with, breathing exercises or mindfulness, and not forgetting imaginative play. One of the most containing things we can do for children is to listen to them, notice what they're feeling, and let them know we understand by reflecting this back to them. As I mentioned earlier, this process actually helps a child become more able to understand and contain their own emotions in the future. As adults, we often feel that children want us to do something about their problems. Although this often is and should be the case, there are many situations when children only want to feel heard and understood. It can be tiring to listen to a child constantly complain about a situation that cannot change, and therefore tempting to cut them off by reminding them of the reality of the situation. There's no point moaning about that, it's never going to change. But often, if you let the child talk, reflect on their feelings regarding the situation, you really don't like it when that happens, you really wish it could be different, then that is enough to allow the child to calm down and move on. I said earlier that I would talk about self care, and it seems a good point to end on. If we want to help others, whether as a friend, teacher, parent, or therapist, it is incredibly important that we look after ourselves. All of the activities I mentioned when talking about children are also useful activities adults can use to look after themselves. Hopefully, once you've finished watching this video, you might take a few moments to think about the things you already do, things you might need to do more of, or maybe some new habits you need to introduce to help you ensure that you're not becoming overwhelmed by the emotions of the children you care about. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or would like more information, please feel free to drop me an email or have a look at some of these websites or books.